Thank you so much. Actually, it's 41. August the 2nd was our 41st year, so thank you. Appreciate that. It's so great to be here and be amongst so many friends and acquaintances. It's great to have a group of folks here from Dunwoody PD. I appreciate them coming out, and also a bunch of folks from Marietta that I used to work with. So it's great to see everybody. It's amazing how these talks, when you start thinking about them and dragging them out all day long, is how they kind of build upon each other. And so I think one of the things that we've learned so far today is that everyone in here has influence inside their organization, inside their family. No matter where you are, you have a circle of influence. And so some of my comments today are going to be related to change your thinking. So I'm going to take a little bit different approach about your influence. But we're all in positions where we can influence our organizations in some way. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about organizationally about how to change our thinking as a police department, as a 911 center, as a ambulance group or firefighters or whatever you happen to be doing. And I think we would probably, if we admitted it, we would kind of realize that we maybe need to change some things inside our organizations or inside our lives as well, and this would apply to that. Sometimes it's difficult to change our mind when we decide something or we've known something for many years, and it's kind of hard to change our mind. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and so first I'm going to give you an example. When I first started in law enforcement many years ago, we chased every single car that ran from us. If they had a tail light out and they ran, we chased them. We would wreck 5 cars trying to stop them. And over the course of time, I mean, some of you remember that, certainly, how we used to do that in Marietta. And over time, though, that's changed. And today, most of our organizations, I know in Dunwoody, we have a pretty restrictive chase policy. Now, that changed because of a lot of reasons. When you're young, you're not that worried about your own life, and you're not, frankly, worried about the lives of other people. But as you grow and we learn and we see the devastation that sometimes happens because of car chases, we realize that, and as we move up in management, we realize from a management perspective that maybe that's not really the best idea. Is it worth risking the life of the people that work for you to get that person that was speeding, to stop them at all costs? It's not. And so our thinking evolved, and it took somebody in the organization to say, hey, maybe what we're doing is not working, is not right. Now, I want to preface all of my talk today to say that I believe law enforcement and all of us that work in public safety are doing a fantastic job. But there is room for improvement. I think we've seen that over the past few years. So who can forget, kind of what happened in Ferguson and the resulting challenges we faced in many of our communities back in 2014. Trust with our community was a challenge at that time. And then, after a year or two, we started building it back, and it became a little better. And then, of course, last year with the death of George Floyd, there were many protests that spread across our country. And in spite of the fact that almost every law enforcement professional across the country condemned the actions of the officers in that incident, nevertheless, we faced a lot of backlash. The defund the police movement was started and spread across the country, and community trust was damaged probably to the extent that I've not seen in my career, and which has been a challenge for us today. And if we think that only happened somewhere else, we know that wasn't the case. We saw that happening here in our community, and we had protests. Fortunately, they were peaceful in Dunwoody, but these type of actions that have broken the community's trust is a challenge for all of us, and it's not just a problem in other places. So our path forward is really unsure and full of minefields, and we don't know necessarily exactly which way to go. Legislation is being introduced, and that legislation is going to dictate which way we go in law enforcement in all of our different fields. There's all kind of legislation pending. There's legislation of Next Generation 911 that's coming up for telecommunications. There's all kind of changes. Now, we can sit by and let the changes come to us, or we can do something about it and affect that change. Maybe take a bold approach to some things that we think we know the way that we're doing them and that we're okay, but maybe we need to look at it from a different perspective, maybe from other people's perspective from outside of law enforcement. So what I'm talking about is really about change. Changing our perception, changing the way we view things, and having the courage to bring that change forward inside your organization. I recently read a book by Adam Grant, and it's called Think Again, and he discusses the challenges to getting people and organizations to think differently. Getting someone to change their mind is not easy, and convincing an organization to change course can be difficult. We have I've always done it this way, or we've always done it this way, and it's sometimes difficult to change that. So for our remaining time together, I'm going to share some of those challenges, how to overcome them, and suggest several areas maybe we in law enforcement can change that we might need to change our thinking on. I know y'all have read in history and remember that for a long time people thought the earth was flat, and so even 500 BC, the Greeks realized the earth was not flat. And so people have evidence for many, many, many years that the earth's not flat. But yet, people still believe the earth is flat, in spite of any evidence, and they're called flat earthers. Y'all probably heard that phrase before. How many have heard that phrase about people? Yeah, it's people who believe things even in spite of the evidence that's contrary to what they believe. And so it's hard to believe that today people still believe that, and they refuse to change their mind in spite of any evidence. So in 2007, how many people actually owned a BlackBerry, remember owning a BlackBerry and used it? Yeah, a lot of people that's been around a while. You remember the BlackBerry, the keyboard, the QWERTY keyboard. It was awesome. I thought I was this was fantastic when I had one. So BlackBerry had about 25% market share of the smartphone in 2007, and that was right when what was about to come out? The iPhone. And so the iPhone was about to come out, and so all the engineers at BlackBerry was talking to the CEO, a guy named Mike Lazaridis, and they were speaking to him, and they were talking about, the iPhone was about to come out, and, maybe getting a touch screen, and also doing away with the keyboard and getting an internet browser and all these things. And the guy was adamant, no, we do not need to change. Our customers want that QWERTY keyboard. They love the keyboard, and they will never go for this other stuff. And so he would not change his mind in spite of everything that was said. And guess what happened to him? In 5 short years, maybe even less, BlackBerry had a 1% share of the market. And so, he failed to change his mind, and that's what happened with him. So in maybe 12, 13, 14 years ago, I was researching the 50th anniversary of the Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police. And we did this little book, and so I did a lot of research on it. And I ran across an article written in the 60s that talked about Miranda versus Arizona. And of course, every law enforcement person in here is familiar with that, and probably most people, just because of how it's used on TV and everything. And so the police chief that wrote this article said, oh my God, this is the end of law enforcement as we know it with this Supreme Court ruling. It's never going to be, we're never ever going to be able to get a confession again. Well, that certainly is not true. Oh, wait a minute, different kind of confession. That certainly wasn't the case. In fact, it actually made our profession better. We continued to get confessions in spite of having to read suspects who are in custody their Miranda warning. What actually ended up happening is that law enforcement became more professional, and the practice of abusing suspect and coercing confessions, it probably didn't stop, but it certainly slowed down. And as a result, we were more professional. So it wasn't the end of the world. And sometimes change is a good thing, even when it's forced down our throat. So change is coming for our field, for all of our professions. And so we can do a couple of things. We can put up a brick wall, and we can say, we're not going to change. We're going to continue doing things like we've always done it, and that's just how it is. Or, we can open our minds up and our thoughts up to change and how that could benefit us, and then talk about and try to figure out what change would be good for our organizations. So Adam Grant in his book talks about kind of a few mindsets, 3 mindsets that we take when we're talking about changing. The first is preacher mode. No offense, preacher, wherever you are. So we go into preacher mode when our sacred beliefs are in jeopardy, and we deliver sermons to protect and promote our ideals. In preacher mode, according to Adam Grant, we have theories but lack evidence. Any thoughtful critique is sacrilege. We look at changing our minds as a moral weakness. That's in preacher mode. We also go into politician mode. So we shift to politician mode when we are seeking to win over an audience. We campaign and lobby, for the people that work with us. In politician mode, we allow our beliefs to be swayed by popularity rather than accuracy. So, whatever the poll says, whatever, 80% of the organization wants, that's what we're going to do because that's the popular thing to do. And that's what politician mode is. And we also flip-flop in response to carrots and sticks. Then in prosecutor mode, we enter prosecutor mode when we recognize flaws in other people's reasoning. We marshal arguments to prove them wrong and win our case. We become focused on discrediting and debunking other points of view rather than discovering the truth. And lastly, in prosecutor mode, if we allow ourselves to be persuaded, it's admitting defeat. We look at the situation as a win-lose. If this person gets their way or their opinion is valid, or I say it's okay, then I lose. So it's a win-lose kind of situation, which is not helpful. Adam Grant really thinks we should be more in scientist mode. So when we're in scientist mode, we are searching for the truth, for the best solution, and looking for the facts. And I think we have that evidence-based policing, things like that. So that's kind of really what we should be doing. So here's the most annoying things people say instead of rethinking. So instead of maybe changing their mind, these are a few annoying things. Don't raise your hand if you've ever heard this said by someone else, or if you've ever said it yourself, more importantly. So the first is, that will never work here. I'm sure we have heard that, said that. I know I have personally. It works in Alpharetta, or it works in Woodstock, or it works at Marietta, but that would never work at our department. It would never work with our team or our group. We take that approach, and that's not a good approach. The second thing is, that's not what my experience has shown. Somebody earlier was talking about experience and how we all have different kinds of experiences. So in my experience, it may not work, but maybe from your experience, because you have a different background, you grew up somewhere differently, you were raised by different parents, you had different life experiences, different work experience, it might work for you. And so maybe it's okay to listen to other people's from their perspectives, because we don't know everything, and our experience is limited to our experience, not what everybody else has. The third thing is, that's too complicated, let's not overthink it. Sometimes solutions are simple, and that's okay, but sometimes they're complicated. And it may take some time and effort to, change our thinking, to do something different, to implement a new program. And that's okay as well. And then lastly, that's the way we have always done it. That's the kiss of death for somebody to say that in any organization. We've always done it that way. Well, that doesn't mean it's okay, to do it that way forever. If that approach was taken, for instance, with vehicle chases, vehicle pursuits, then you might be an organization that still chases everything. If they speed, they have a broken taillight, you're going to chase them, even if you have to wreck 10 cars to do it. That's probably not happening, but so that approach will get you nowhere. So Adam Grant talks about the confidence sweet spot. So on the left side, we have a belief in yourself. And so you either have a secure belief or you're insecure. And on the top side, it's belief in your tools. So your training, your experience, and what you have. And you're either certain or uncertain. So in the upper left-hand corner, that's obsessive inferiority. You're insecure in your belief system. And this all affects how you're willing to give your opinion on something or not. So you're unsure, you're insecure, you kind of feel inferior. So even though you're certain, because you're not confident in yourself, you probably won't say anything. To the right-hand side, when you're uncertain of your tools and insecure, you have debilitating doubt. So you're probably not going to speak up. In this position, you probably have an imposter syndrome. You're kind of thinking, I don't really belong here. I probably shouldn't be here because I'm not confident in myself and I don't really know enough. On the bottom left-hand side, you have blind arrogance. And so this is when you're secure and certain. And this is really the terrible spot. They have Mount Stupid is in this particular place because the smarter you are and the more secure you are in yourself, the less you are open to other points of view and other opinions. You could probably think of somebody that might be like that when you're sitting here listening to this. And this is where the armchair quarterback resides. So, they're watching TV and they know what the coach should do better than the coach does. They tell you're an idiot, even though that guy's been coaching for 40 years and all this experience. And so that's where the armchair quarterback resides. But where we should be is in the secure in ourself, belief in ourself, but maybe uncertain in our tools and experience, where our minds are open to change, to other points of view. And this is confident humility. And that's where we should reside in order to open our minds up so that we can make some changes that are needed. So Albert Einstein said, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. So if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, and not getting different results, I think he said something about that too. So that's not a good space. So what we need to do is how do we encourage an environment at work where we can rethink our beliefs? So where it is okay to try something different, where people can speak up. I'm going to have to apologize because this next slide has a typo. I just noticed it. That should say psychological safety, but it says psychology safety. So anyways, it's psychological safety. It's fostering a climate of respect, trust, and openness in which people can raise concerns and suggestions without the fear of reprisal. It's really the foundation of a learning culture. So here's a couple of examples of when you have it and when you don't. So if you work in an environment, I really want you to pause right now and think about your organization and to yourself, not to anybody else, but answer these questions. Which side do you fit in your organization? So when you have psychological safety, you see mistakes as opportunities to learn. But when you don't have psychological safety, you see mistakes as threats to your career. So when you're afraid to make a mistake because you're going to get written up, or you're going to be in trouble, or you're going to be ostracized, or you're going to be looked at badly, then you're not in a place of psychological safety. When you have it when you're willing to take risk and fail. So that's a clue in your organization. If people are taking risks and doing things and making suggestions, they probably feel pretty secure because they know that if they fail, you're not going to bite their head off or do something different. When you don't have psychological safety, you're unwilling to rock the boat. So you don't want to take any chances. You don't want to do anything. When you have it, you're speaking your mind in meetings. And when you don't, you're keeping your ideas to yourself. We talk about this all the time at some of our staff meetings, and some of the folks are here that can tell you that. They sit in the staff meetings. I say, if we're talking about an idea for our department, a new program, changing a policy, whatever it happens to be, and every single person in this room agrees with that policy except you have an obligation to speak up and say, I don't agree with that policy, or I don't agree with whatever it happens to be, and explain your position. You may change the mind of everyone in the room, but if you sat there and keep your mouth shut and you don't say anything, and then we implement whatever it is and something happens, don't come later and go, I knew that. I knew that was the way it was going to be. So, but when you have psychological safety, people will speak up. And I would say people speak up in our organization quite frequently. When you have psychological safety, you trust in your teammates and supervisors. You trust them. But if you don't, you fear your teammates and supervisors. If you don't have any psychological safety, what is my teammate, what are my peers going to do? What's my supervisor going to do to me? And so that's not a good environment. And then lastly, when you have it, you're sticking your neck out, you're taking risks, and when you don't, your neck gets chopped off. So not a good place to be. So I want to end here in just a few minutes and go through a few things where I think maybe we can. Some of these are really specific to law enforcement, but I want you to think about your organization and things that you might could change as well. These are a few things I think we could look at. One is technology. Law enforcement has a love-hate relationship with technology. We've kind of always viewed it a little bit as a pain in the butt and great, something nice to have when it works. Today, technology is a must-have in our organizations, and I know most organizations have done a pretty good job adopting technology. We'll never have enough police officers or enough 911 operators or firefighters or anything to do everything. We have to use technology to be smarter, to be wiser. An example of that is LPR for a lot of us. I know we have a lot of LPR cameras. That's been a game changer for us and helping us do our jobs so much better. Next would be related to recruiting. When I first started, 50-something people took the test to join the Marietta Police Department, and out of that number, 14 of us passed the test. So it was very challenging to join the department. And the law enforcement leaders of the day looked at recruits as lucky to have a chance to work at our department. That's really flipped. And I think right now we should look at them like we're lucky to have them when we recruit people to our department. There's a lot of factors that come into play. One is we have a great economy. Anytime, for those that's been around a while, when you have a good economy, people leave law enforcement, and when you have a bad economy, they come back to law enforcement or any of our public safety jobs. And then really, because of all that's gone on the last 5 years, there's so many people now who are just not interested in getting into law enforcement. They don't want to become work in a 911 center. They don't want to join a fire department. They're not wanting to get involved in public service at all. So how can we look at things or do things differently? I think one is we can make it a quick process when we hire people. Not skipping any steps, but we need to be very quick in how you hire them. And no longer can you take 3 months, 6 months or something to hire people. You've got to do a much quicker job of that. Also, we need to take a look at our disqualifiers. Does your department have automatic disqualifiers, or do you look at them on a case-by-case basis? I think that's important. I'm not talking about lowering our standards, but things have changed from when I started, 40 years ago. It's a much different group of people that we're pursuing to work in our organizations. And then when you have a good candidate, really you have to pursue them. You have to go after them text with them. That's a good tip right there. They like that communications. I see Felipe smiling. He's a young guy, about 23 years old with our department. He probably likes to do all the texting and everything. So we had an officer that we hired a few years ago, and he was a graduate, just graduated from Georgia Tech, and great candidate on paper, looked like a sharp guy, and he had applied at multiple police departments. And so we reached out to him, stayed in constant contact with him, talked to him, and then when I got to my interview, and if it was successful, he'd get a conditional job offer. And during the interview, he said, "Chief, I want to come to the Dunwoody Police Department." And I said, "Well, tell me why you chose us over all these other departments you're applying at." He said, "Because you guys made me feel like you wanted me." And he recognized that. And I think that's so important. So that's a lesson really for all of us to think about that a little bit differently. And we can't, with recruiting, we can't forget about the people that we already have. And I know somebody was talking about maybe Trent and how the sergeant greeted him when he got to Atlanta. When I got there in Marietta, I was told to sit in the car, keep my mouth shut, don't say anything. They didn't want to hear from me or talk to me or anything. But it's different today. I'm a baby boomer. Baby boomers typically stayed with organizations their entire career. It's probably not that way for most of us today. And so there's some challenges. So one, we have to give them challenging work. We have to give them opportunities for growth. People today value their off time. And, if you're on a 8-hour schedule, I think, that might be something you need to think about. 12-hour schedules seem to work really well. A lot of departments in here, I think, are on 12-hour schedules. And, in 2 weeks, officers will work 7 on and 7 off in those 2 weeks. So they get 7 off days in 2 weeks. So they really love it. And so that's one thing to look at. They need good equipment. More importantly, a good work environment. A work environment that supports them, that gives them an opportunity for growth. We can't focus on writing tickets or writing people up. That's kind of two things there. I remember having a supervisor at Marietta years and years ago, and he's no longer there, but he liked catching people doing something wrong. He spent his shift trying to catch somebody doing something wrong. Instead, we need to try to catch people doing the right things. And then, I'm trying to hurry up. I'm running just a little bit behind. But we need to be transparent in all that we do. This is, that wasn't even a word when I started in 1981, but it is a word that's used today. And we say a lot of times, "Oh, we're transparent and all this," but are we really? When someone goes to your website, can they see your policies? Can they see your crime stats? Can they see your use of force? Can they see the complaints that's come into the department? Can they see the demographics of your department? The more information I think we can put out there for the public, the better. Now, I'm not saying that we do everything like this right in Dunwoody. We're still working to get some of those things implemented, but I think the more that we can do that, the better it will be for our organizations and for the communities we serve. And then community trust is important. I think there's been a lot of, and I think this varies from community to community, but I think there's been a lot of challenges with that, and part of those challenges can be, I think, affected a lot by accountability, about holding ourselves accountable. When we have somebody that messes up, then we need to acknowledge that, move forward, correct it. And sometimes I think, I've seen many cases across the country where something's obviously not probably kosher, and, they defend, people get very defensive, they want to do everything they can but acknowledge that, hey, we messed up, we're going to do better in the future. So I think that's one important aspect of building that trust. If we can kind of look at things a little bit differently, we can maybe take the impossible, which are the things we maybe can't do, and turn them into possibilities of how we can interact with our communities, improve our departments, and better serve the citizens. So how do you change your thinking? As I wind up, there's a few ways. One, you can educate yourself. And so you're doing a great job here. by attending this conference and listening to a lot of different perspectives and speakers. But you can do that by reading, listening to podcasts. There's all kind of ways you can do that. Second is realize you don't know everything. And so that's the first step to maybe a 12-step process, but it's the first step of realizing that if you don't know everything, then other people's opinion could have value. And listening, being able to listen to other people and understand and maybe change your mind about some things. Open yourself up to other viewpoints. It's so important to be able to do that. If you're not open to other viewpoints, then you're never going to listen to anybody or never change your mind about what you might be thinking. And then try something new. It's not the end of the world. We try things all the time at our department. We might implement a policy and go, that wasn't exactly right, or a program, and we say, maybe that's not working. And there's nothing wrong with punting and trying something different. Adam Grant had this great quote, which I like. He said, the purpose of learning isn't to affirm our beliefs, it's to evolve our beliefs. So if we go and learn and say, oh yeah, that fits in exactly how I believe, that's what I think, and everything you learn is related to just confirming what you already know, then you're not really learning much. So it's really to help us evolve our beliefs and thoughts. If we can do that, if we can take a look at all the different things, whether it's in our personal lives or at work, and kind of think about why we believe what we believe and why we think what we think, and maybe change those things when appropriate, then I think we'll have a lot of success ahead of us. I appreciate your time. Here's my contact information, and it's got my cell number, my personal and work email address, and some Twitter handles. At the bottom, if you'll text Top Cop to 66866, I'll send you my suggested reading list, just a free thing for you. So thank you very much. I appreciate all of your attention.